A couple of years ago, I did a video showing you guys a few different options for RetroArch-based gaming handhelds. I'd say the most popular of those ended up being the GPi Case from RetroFlag, which lets you just toss a Raspberry Pi Zero with RetroPie in it and you were good to go. It's still pretty popular on Amazon. Well, they're back with an updated version that addresses just about every issue that I had with the first one, and it also adds a couple of features, including an optional dock so that you can play it on your TV. It's also much more powerful thanks to the Raspberry Pi 4 compute module that this one uses. In fact, I'd say really my only complaint about this one is it's too powerful. Yes, I'm serious. Alright, so I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute, but as usual, a couple of things to get out of the way before I get started. First is that they did send me 2 of these things, one of them to give away to you guys. So if you want a chance to enter to win that, as usual, check out the link in the description. And by the way, no, this isn't sponsored, they're not paying me or anything like that, they just sent me a couple units to check out. The other thing is that yes, I know I've been doing a lot of these kinds of videos recently, and I promise I'm going to be getting back to doing my own projects, tutorials, and things like that, things that I'm really excited about. So keep an eye out for that soon. In fact, I may do a quick update video about that. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get started. So they sent me 2 versions, the basic with just the shell, and the deluxe, which also includes a dock. And I've never really been big on unboxings, but here's what it comes with. Got a RetroFlag branded USB Type-C cable, some instructions, and then of course the shell itself, which just like the first GPi Case feels really nice. Super solid, doesn't feel cheap at all. The buttons feel very similar to an original Game Boy. Again, all just like the first version. Here they are side by side, exact same size and shape, but the new one is much lighter since it uses a lithium polymer battery where the original used AA's, which was one of my biggest complaints about that one. The screen is also a little bit bigger on the new one and is much higher quality. Compared to the original Game Boy, it's shaped exactly the same, just shrunk down a little bit. I'd say it's more comparable to a Game Boy Pocket in size. So on the front, we've got the same button layout as the first version, with the addition of this RetroFlag button, which you can set up as a function button inside RetroArch. And then there's this star button, which they call a turbo button, but can actually do a few different things. On the bottom, there's a USB-C port for charging and data in HDMI, and a headphone jack. Up top is the power switch and a low power mode button, which basically just shuts off the screen, so you're really just meant to use that for short periods. Volume wheel is on the right, love having a physical control instead of buttons, and a second wheel on the other side, marked contrast but really controls the backlight. Then on the back are the L&R buttons. I love the way they implemented these. They're actually what gave me the idea for the L&R buttons on the Gem Boy Zero project. Removing this fake cartridge gives you access to the SD card and the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4. This is basically a Pi 4 with all the ports removed, so it's tiny, and it's a huge upgrade over the Pi Zero that the first version used. And then up here at the top is a micro USB port for updating the firmware on the shell itself. Next, in the deluxe version, we've got that USB cable, the GPi Case itself, of course, more instructions with some extra details about the dock, and then the exciting part for this one, the dock. It feels really nice, it's much heavier than I expected. It's got an HDMI port, power input, and then 2 USB ports that you can use for controllers or external hard drive, things like that. And you can tell they put a lot of thought into this. It's got a spring-loaded plate at the bottom, similar to how the Nintendo Switch dock works, which makes it easier to insert and remove. And then they put a sticky pad at the bottom so that you can actually stick it to your table or TV stand or whatever, so you can use it without holding it down. So in handheld mode, it feels great to play and the screen is gorgeous. And it can run a ton of systems really well thanks to that Raspberry Pi 4 chip. So Super Nintendo, original Game Boy Advance, most stuff from that era and actually beyond runs great. But when you start getting into systems that had analog sticks, you start really wishing that it had one, because several systems like the N64, even though they run great on this thing, for a lot of games you're going to need to map the D-pad to the analog stick controls, which is fine in some games, but you're kind of out of luck if you want to play a game that needs both of those at the same time. And again, even though PSP and Dreamcast run great, you're going to run into this problem with those as well. You can configure this stuff per game, but that quickly starts to get annoying. So that's why I say this thing is, at least in handheld mode, too powerful, because it simply doesn't have the controls to play all the systems that it can actually run. Its saving grace, and what I think is absolutely essential to make it worth buying, is the dock. Once you pair it with a Bluetooth controller, all of those limitations go away and you have a pretty killer little emulation device to play on your TV. You just have to accept the fact that a lot of games are going to be pretty annoying to try and play in handheld mode, which is unfortunate because, again, The Compute Module 4 is pretty powerful and it can run N64, Dreamcast, and PSP really well. So when you are playing in handheld mode though, battery life is pretty good. I got about 5 hours running Super Metroid and just under 4.5 hours running Dreamcast. I had the brightness about halfway, so you could probably squeeze a little bit more out of it by turning that down. So the last thing I wanted to do was take this thing apart and see what's inside of it. Partly out of sheer curiosity, but I was also curious how much potential there was for modding it. It comes apart pretty easily, just a few screws and some clips to undo. There's the 4000 milliamp hour battery. Looks like there might be room for a bigger one, but I'm not sure if I'd recommend swapping it. More on that in just a second. They have a thermistor taped to it, I guess to monitor the temperature while it's charging, so that's good. And then these low profile L&R tactile switches here. Then to get at the other side of the board, you'll have to remove the battery to get to a couple more screws. And this thing is taped in there really well. I do not recommend prying it off for fear of damaging it and maybe setting it on fire. Plus, I did it so you don't have to. I worked at this thing carefully for like 15 minutes solid and finally got it off. Yeah, it's taped down in there really well. Again, don't do this. And there we have the front side of the board. Tactile switches for turbo and function. Interesting choice for the conductive button pads. It has these chunky coated style ones just like the original DMG. Usually these days you see bare traces on the boards for those. Looking underneath the screen, looks like there's a second unpopulated ribbon connector. I guess maybe for another screen variant, or maybe another shell they were working on, who knows. Then there's another unpopulated connector here, which leads to some pins on this microcontroller, which controls all the button presses and stuff. I looked it up and those unpopulated traces are going to serial pins on it, so I'm guessing it's for debugging or programming or something. I was hoping that it might be an unused USB port, but that does not seem to be the case. Okay, well I think that about covers it, but as usual, if you have any questions or anything that you want me to test specifically, let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer you. A huge thanks to RetroFlag for sending these over to check out, and again, if you want a chance to enter to win one of them, you can do so at the link in the description. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you guys next time.